Again, good afternoon and thank you for joining us. My name is LaRock. I'm the president and CEO of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, better known as NIFTY, and welcome to this session on the power of entrepreneurship education to help young people find their passions, reduce post-secondary and career mismatches. Let me first introduce our distinguished panel. We have with us Chancellor Henry Mack from the Florida Department of Education. In his role, he is responsible for career and technical education, both on the secondary and the post-secondary side. We're joined by Carmen Garcia, a teacher at the MAST school in the Miami-Dade County School District, and also a NIFTY master educator, and Andy Park, managing director of EY's Los Angeles office. And EY, as you may know, the global accounting and consulting firm, is also a company that has a very big commitment to entrepreneurship. So we're all here today to have a conversation about what entrepreneurship education is, why it matters, and how it's a really special model to help young people find out who they are and what they love. And as an introduction to this, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the sponsor of this session, American Student Assistance, whose whole animating principle is about the importance of our education systems to do a better job, starting in middle school, to help young people find out who they are, what they love, and how that can translate into the right pathway for them into post-secondary education, if that's their desire, and onto a job and a career. If you haven't heard about NIFTY, by the way, we're a global nonprofit organization founded in 1987, headquartered in New York, and our mission is to build the next generation of diverse entrepreneurs by supporting high-quality entrepreneurship education in the US and around the world. This past year, we worked in 25 states, including Florida and California, and in 14 countries, serving a collective 50,000 students. So let's jump right into the conversation. And Chancellor Mack, I'm going to start off with you. Now, the state of Florida has made a commitment of $2.5 million over the last 2 years, a lot of attention in promoting entrepreneurship education specifically. Why?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity, and good afternoon, everyone. I think there are two reasons why the state of Florida is investing its Perkins dollars. So this is the preeminent federal investment that states get every year into entrepreneurship for CTE students for two reasons. One is an economic reason. We know the employability skills gap is real. That is to say, we need to graduate students with analytical, critical, communication, empathetic skills that can meet the demands of the future of work. In addition to understanding how to undergo risk, or how to ideate, or be entrepreneurs within businesses. In other words, we need not just to graduate technically skilled employees, but employees that can think. And we know employers are screaming for this in Florida. So the economic measure is real. The other interesting thing too is, and I'm sure it's the case in other states, the majority of businesses in Florida are small businesses, right? 99% of businesses in Florida, about 2.7 million of them, occupy that space with 3.5 employees employed by those small businesses. So about 42% of Florida's employed are employed by small businesses. We have a scale-up problem in Florida. We don't have necessarily a startup problem. We need these small businesses to grow, and they need talent. And so investing in entrepreneurship education at the K-12 level and post-secondary level matters for that economic reason. The other reason, which is maybe more primary, is that it's good for the individual. We are involved in not just skill training, but in character development and formation. Florida sees this as an ethical or moral issue, that we are cultivating the mindsets and the habits in view of the economic aim, but more about the well-being of the individual, the student, and what entrepreneurship education we know does for them in that regard, which is why, again, we've committed another $1.5 million out of our Perkins leadership dollars to K-12 school districts, post-secondary institutions to scale entrepreneurship education for their CTE programs that are Perkins eligible.
Carmen, let me jump off of the Chancellor's point and take the next question to you. You are a classroom teacher, you're a veteran teacher, you come from industry. Tell us some stories about students you have witnessed over the years who maybe didn't start out knowing what drove them, what their passions were, and where they wound up at the end of a process of being able to have an entrepreneurship education class.
What's interesting, I was in a school where my ninth grade class, most of them had a fifth grade reading level and had been, over the years, frustrated because they just weren't happy with school. They had no reason, they just didn't see a purpose to it. And getting them through the program, getting them to understand that they had to present, they had to do the writing and readings that come with it. They had to learn Excel, they had to learn how to do presentations, they had to do marketing material. Was a little bit painstaking through the process, but as soon as they were able to see the products, and of course the classroom became chaos as we were building their presentations and their boards for their final competitions, they were able to see that there was purpose to it, that they could use these skills and take it on to something that was of their passion. So I allowed the students to be able to really choose and have a voice and choice in what products they were going to advertise and sell, and they took ownership. They really were happy to see their final pieces, and that's, I think, the most important part, is giving them the options that we see in doing PBLs in our classrooms for CTE courses, that they're able to decide where they want to put their focus.
If I may, those feelings of self-efficacy, the understanding of one's purpose, passions, and how they can align their academic program to that goal, I would say is reliably achieved by entrepreneurship education and training treatment. Right? You treat the students with those things, more than likely that results, which is why the state has an interest in supporting it. For mere accountability reasons, certainly the school districts do too. It's a great win for them, but also, again, for the moral, ethical, human development component too.
And I think too, as a teacher, it was also easier, rather than being Susie on the stage, always presenting information and them just listening, it was more of a facilitating. So the students were taking ownership in learning and what skills do they need in order to complete their project. And not necessarily did every child need the same skills, but they also would also have a collaboration with each other of, oh, how did you do this? Where did you create this? I found this interesting. How can I learn to do that part? So they were able to really bounce off of each other rather than only myself in the classroom, to be able to learn skills that they didn't think they needed, but they wanted to learn them afterwards.
I want to come back to you, Carmen, and ask you to tell the audience more about some of the really creative businesses that your students have launched, but I want to get Andy in here. So, Andy, tell us about your own story, because in addition to the work that you do through EY, which as a company has this big commitment to entrepreneurship, it's very personal to you. Tell us why.
I run our Entrepreneur of the Year program in Greater Los Angeles. It's a program that we've been running for 35 years that celebrates entrepreneurs that are innovating and disrupting today's world. And just listening to Chancellor Mack and Carmen, I can't help but to think about the skills that I see these entrepreneurs have. And they're not typically taught in our traditional education systems. Skills such as grit, drive, tenacity, resilience. Yeah, you gain grit and you gain resilience when you're struggling with a calculus problem, I get it. But oftentimes, these skills aren't really taught. They have to be shown or they have to be experienced directly, right? And this new world that we're living in, they're posing new challenges and they're going to require new skills to teach our students for them to be able to be successful in their careers. So as I think about the entrepreneurs that are out there that are successful, I can't help but to think that our students are going to need these skills to be successful in this next world that we're moving into post-pandemic, a virtual world. A world that's better connected, a global world. So those are some thoughts that were running through my head when you were asking me that question.
One aspect of the model that we use at the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship is really relying on corporate and community volunteers who serve as mentors, but also judges for our business plan competitions. And by the way, the sort of culmination of the work that we're all talking about here is that students come out of the experience having taken an idea and developed it into a real business plan. And many students who go through the experiences that we're talking about here often launch businesses, and many of them have sustained them for years afterwards. So they really are creating a pipeline to the next generation of entrepreneurs in America. But the mentorship component is particularly important. Talk a little bit about what happens at EY with you, your colleagues who come into classrooms, both in person, pre-COVID, but now virtually, to support young learners, and why that is important.
Absolutely. At EY, we believe there's a critical need for mentors and volunteers. I want to share some statistics. Less than 75% of our students that come from the bottom income quartile families are graduating high school. Not college, but high school. Less than 50% of these students are moving on to college, and far fewer are getting a bachelor's degree. This is a staggering statistic because 65% of our jobs today require post-secondary education. There's a supply and demand issue right now. And our future workforce is being left behind. We're not giving them the tools and the mindset that they need to be successful. And we believe we got to answer this first question of why these students aren't going to college. I believe there's 3 reasons why. Number 1 is the financial barrier. Even if they can get into college, they don't think they can pay for it. They don't understand the financial aid system, the scholarship programs, merit-based, need-based scholarships, so we need to teach them. The second reason is unfamiliarity and culture shock. A lot of these students will be the first in their families to go to college. They don't have a dad or a mom or a community that surrounds them, that can encourage them, tell them the benefits of going to college, and once they do get to college, helping them actually graduate. So there's a culture shock issue, so we need to provide that type of mentorship. Third reason is resources. Believe it or not, a lot of these students don't have the basic equipment to be successful students. They have outdated laptops, they don't have access to high-speed internet, and they struggle. And I want you to think about this for a second. The beginning of the pandemic, I have a family of 3, my wife and I. Out of nowhere, in March, we had to adapt, and all 3 of us were on Zoom. I was on Zoom with clients, my daughter was on Zoom working, and my wife was working. And I had to upgrade my internet service. There was no way I had enough bandwidth to provide internet services for all 3 of us, especially video. Some families didn't have that luxury. They couldn't upgrade their internet service. I'm talking about the families that maybe lived in 1-bedroom apartments too, where you had the brother in the room, sister in the living room, mom in the kitchen, dad outside in the hallway trying to take a conference call. And those situations further exacerbated the problem, right? So those 3 reasons block our students from going to college. And I'm being a big Debbie Downer. I want to be positive here. There's actually solutions, right? The first solution is we do need to break this digital divide. The pandemic made this problem a lot more apparent. It became a situation of the haves and the have-nots. And this is a solution that we need to address by getting basic technology and internet needs to our students, right? That's an easy one. The second one is mentorship, right? Students that are mentored are more likely to graduate high school. They're likely to become leaders in their communities. And 3, they're going to enter adulthood more prepared and more willing to go to college, right? And mentorship has to be done intentionally. You can't just take a student that has an interest in a career and match him with someone in that career. It doesn't work that easily. I remember my wife always brings her friends over and she says, hey, you're going to love this, my friend's husband. He likes sports. And you spend an evening getting dinner together, the wife's talking with each other, and you and that husband are going into the other room, and you likely turn on the game, and you're talking, and you find out you have absolutely nothing in common. And you ask your wife, what were you thinking? Why did you think I would get along with this person? Well, he likes sports. Mentorship doesn't work like that. You can't just take a random student and a random person in a profession and match them together. Students need to be mentored by someone that they can identify with. Someone that looks like them, comes from the same community, has dealt with and understands the same challenges that they've been through. And by doing that, you empower that student to dream big and say, hey, you know what? If they did it, so can I. They look like me, they talk like me, they've been through what I've been through, and if they can do it, I can do it. So it has to be intentional. And companies like EY have the responsibility to help students identify their passions, help them find skills that are aligned to those passions, and then talk about careers within their organizations where those passions and skills can be used and the student can thrive. Too many students choose the wrong career. It's not by choice, it's actually just due to not having enough information. They watch TV and they see Law and Order and say, hey, it'd be cool to be an attorney. I can't wait to go to court. And they realize they take a job and they're never in court. They're in the office pushing a bunch of paper. They think it'd be cool to, be a doctor, but they don't realize they're afraid of blood when they actually see it, right? And when students choose the wrong career, it leads to job dissatisfaction, poor performance, and ultimately unfilled potential. So we got to make sure we educate our students to pick the right career, right?
I want to broaden the lens and talk about some of the broader potential benefits of entrepreneurship education in a moment. But before I do, Carmen, I have to ask you about some of the really great businesses your students have launched. Tell everybody about Event Planning for Pets.
Event Planning for Pets was a student of mine, Elizabeth, who comes from a background of parents who came from Cuba with nothing, had to build their own business and figure out their own careers. We're from Miami, Florida. And she also felt like she had the grit for it. So she came up with her ideas, which didn't start off to be the event planning for pets, but it was some other event that she wanted to create. And she completely ditched her entire idea for her business. And within, I want to say it was like a week or two before having to get to the competition level, she redid her whole business plan. And I made it clear to her, I said, I understand you got to do your business plan, all your marketing materials, how are you going to present this, what are you going to speak about, make sure your financials are in order. And she goes, yeah, don't worry about it, I've got this. So she did. And she ended up winning at our regional level and took it up to the national level and came in as a runner-up for nationals. And it was something that was just in her passion. And she continues with it. She graduated high school early and is now using it as a side business.
Thank you for sharing that. And if I may, that's just one of many examples of nifty graduates who do come out of the program with a real business plan and who have even launched and sustained businesses. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Compass, the real estate firm. I see some head nods. Yep. So the CEO and founder, Robert Refkin, got his start as an entrepreneur in a nifty summer camp. And so that was the first step. And by the way, the idea for Compass was not his original business, but it was that exposure and experience to entrepreneurship as a 10th grader that set him on a path that now has poised him to become one of the youngest black multimillionaires in our country. I can also talk about a young woman that I know of in Massachusetts who established one of the first gluten-free bakeries in Massachusetts before that was really a thing. That started out as one shop that was actually her business that she put together in a nifty classroom. Now today she has 3 shops across the state and just launched an online business. So there are many, many examples like that. But entrepreneurship education is valuable beyond that. Chancellor, you have thought and talked a lot about the development of the entrepreneurial mindset and why that's important. What is the entrepreneurial mindset in your view, and why is that important more broadly?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that point. To your point, it is an indirect and very welcomed and happy effect if the students start their own businesses while they're engaging in the high school curriculum or even in the post-secondary curriculum. Certainly that's good economically for Florida, but again, the primary aim, at least for Florida, is that we are cultivating humans that are prepared for the future of work by getting them equipped with the mindset and capabilities. So as I mentioned at the outset, analytical thinking, communication, the ability to listen, to focus, to understand the perspective of another, to ideate, to value create, to pivot. These are all remarkably transferable skills. Even if they don't end up starting their own small business, employers are crying for talent that demonstrably show these kinds of capabilities, the capacity mentally, but also the ability to act. And you cannot do that reliably so without the passion, without the purpose, without the conviction, and the desire that entrepreneurship education, again, reliably cultivates, principally because of the mentorship component, but also because of the curriculum and the engagement of the faculty member. And again, this matters hands down, for which reason we know that it wasn't just sufficient to pay for entrepreneurship education and training through our Perkins grants. And now that I'm up here talking about it, talking about equity and access, I'm also thinking about WIOA leadership dollars that we can use for adults who are engaging in their basic skills and high school equivalency work. Why not embed entrepreneurship education in those programs too? Side note, we needed to verify this somehow. Thankfully, we partnered with Intuit and Certiport to add the Entrepreneurship Small Business Industry Certification, independently endorsed by Intuit, as well as the Design Thinking Certification, independently endorsed by Intuit, to Florida's CAPE list. The CAPE list is a $100 million proposition that flows to districts for teachers to offer these certifications. So teachers get a bonus, school district gets a bonus, and then the program that this certification is earned in gets a bonus or monies for sustainability purposes. In Florida, we dish out about $100 million on average a year to the K-12 school districts, about $30 million to our technical colleges and state colleges to offer industry certifications, since we know the value of skill attainment. But since we know the value of skill attainment relative to entrepreneurship, we needed a way to verify it, and for which reason we're very grateful to Intuit for doing that with us to help not only verify, but also scale and grow, since funding and resources for teachers, let's face it, is a barrier, right? It's a real practical barrier with school districts still, and I'll say it, I don't know if I'm supposed to say it, but I'll say it, school districts still inordinately focused on traditional academic pathways and not focused on how valuable CTE is. And in Florida at least, it's been a bifurcated proposition. In Florida, CTE has been perceived as something lesser than, something opposed to traditional academics, which can only exacerbate certain divides that we do not want to exacerbate for particular people, right? And if we can right-size it, and if we can braid funding together, it makes the whole endeavor, frankly, just remarkably beautiful, right, for the future of our society.
If I could jump in there, with the industry certification, one of the things that my kids always saw in the classroom is it became a competition. How many certificates can I get? So within the NIFTY, because of building a business plan, they had to use Intuit's QuickBooks programs. They would use all of Adobe's products. We would use Microsoft Office products. So the kids would look at us like, okay, I have at least a dozen certificates that I can work on. And I've created enough products in each of them that now I know the skills that I need in order to get prepared for the testing of it. So the students would also use that as a competition in the classroom to see how many certificates. And I had one student who actually walked out with 7 certificates in 1 year. Her mission was she was going to have Adobe under her belt, and she walked out with 7
It's amazing.
certificates in there.
And in Florida, the teacher gets more money if those certifications can articulate into credit at the post-secondary level. It's called a gold standard articulation. So the funding is doubled if you can link it to credit. And the idea that your students are walking away not just with entrepreneurship, but all the other relevant industry certifications, again, it's a win-win for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
Right.
Carmen, do you see that those opportunities let students figure out what they don't like? So let's say they pursue a certification and it's like, hey, this is not for me.
Oh, absolutely.
It also gives them an opportunity to pick the right career, right?
Yes, and because we're using the different softwares, they're able to see what areas they're interested in. But I think also having the mentorships in the classroom is very important for us because, again, kind of like the teachers were kind of like the moms in the classroom and no one wants to listen to mom. So by bringing in the outside workforce into the classroom, what I'm saying in the classroom makes more sense and has more value to it. So they look forward to having the mentors in the room with them a couple times a year that they can bounce ideas off of and know that it's not mom talking in the classroom to use that information.
Let me bring out one other point about how entrepreneurship education has more broader salutary effects. And Andy, I'll put this back to you. EY mentors and volunteers who come into the classrooms do all kinds of different jobs. What are some of the jobs that volunteers who show up in a NIFTY classroom might do?
They could be an auditor, someone who audits financial statements. They could be a tax return preparer, someone who prepares tax returns. They could be someone who does global international structuring for a Fortune 50 company. They could be someone helping a startup company receive local credits and grants to get their businesses upstarted. They could be someone that implements SAP and ERP software. They could be someone that focuses on mergers and acquisitions. They could also be from our HR team. They could be part of the recruiting team. Big organizations like EY have both breadth and depth in terms of career opportunities and who and what we represent. We not only have the responsibility, but a true opportunity to really show these students what's really out there, right? So,
and that's exactly why I asked the question, because, you know, as members of this audience will already know, the opportunities for some of our learners to be exposed to the full range of careers and sectors and industries might be quite limited in the areas where they live. And so we have to be proactive about exposing them and bringing that into the classroom setting. One salutary aspect of our model is that because it's powered in part by corporate and community mentors and volunteers, students are not only being supported specifically in how to develop their business idea and develop their business plan, they're also just learning about what job that mentor does. And as you were saying earlier, Andy, it's particularly powerful when a student is exposed to somebody who looks like them, who has some sense of shared experience, gives them a sense of possibility that they may not see otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely, JD, and I'll share this story. I think mentorship has to start early. The sooner, the better. I can't wait till high school. I'm gonna give a personal example. I have a daughter. When she was 4 years old, she used to sit in when I would go up at my local church to give our Sunday announcements. After the pastor gave his sermon, I'd go up and give the Sunday announcements on what's going on at church. And ever since she was 4, and she's 11 today, she's been watching me for 7 years give the weekly church announcements. And I call this programming. I catch my daughter a lot, just in a corner somewhere or in the downstairs room by herself, giving the church announcements. And she actually does it better than I do. She's understand the humor of self-deprecation, right? Sarcasm, connecting with the audience, eye contact, engaging body language. I call that programming. And we need to program our students to think positively, think big, dream big, and really push themselves to go see what's out there. And like I said, the worst thing we can see our students do is if they do go to college, they've already achieved that milestone, picking the wrong career. They got to go test the waters and see what's out there. So I really want to encourage everybody in here, if you have a chance to mentor, start it early and really just share your own personal story, your career journey and how you got there. And the more students you talk to, the more students you're going to impact.
We have just over 10 minutes left in our session, and I would like to provide the audience with an opportunity to ask questions, but I'd like to take the last question back to you, Chancellor Mack. You have now put forth an effort to expand entrepreneurship education beyond career and technical education, but to schools in general in Florida through a teacher training effort. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, so not only are we targeting the students within CTE, but we want to target the faculty members to give them the necessary tools to understand mindset, capability, and how to structure an educational experience that gets at the whole person, right? And so through partnerships with NIFTY and other players at the table, again, our state resources and dollars can flow directly to school districts and institutions, colleges too, if not especially to provide the necessary professional development that they need to help scale and to help grow the work. Since we know, for this to be sustainable, we need the Carmens, we need evangelizers of the work, and that can only happen if with the faculty buy-in. Right? It's very difficult, as I think we all know, to grow a movement within education from the top down. We really want converts from the bottom up, and so our investment goes both ways, into the students and into the formal programming, but certainly into the teacher professional development and training that our federal dollars support, but then also too, leveraging the state dollars through the CAPE list and the resources that flow as a result of industry certification attainment. Those monies can go to the faculty as well.
Thank you very much for that. All right, audience, it's your turn. Does anyone have a question? Please stand up, and I don't know if we have a mic out there, but if you have a question, please stand up and say your question, and then I'll repeat it back just for the recording. Any questions from the audience? Sir, yes.
My name is Michael Simpson with a company called Parent, and there's two things. One, I'd like to kind of affirm the skill development. We actually, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've used a behavioral assessment to measure a lot of about 350 entrepreneurs' skill sets, and which has led me to identify that most successful entrepreneurs have what you would normally consider an unhealthy level of optimism to be able to succeed and get through all of those things. Carmen, I'm curious how you can, how your program actually works to kind of facilitate that almost unhealthy level of optimism when the rest of the education system kind of throws cold water on that to some degree.
Well, typically in my classroom, again, going to this class that I had that, again, were really run down kids, had been pushed through the system, and really hated school. I started by just telling them, let's get through one assignment. Let's get through one piece. They would look at the software and say, I can't do this. I'm like, again, don't even pay attention to the whole picture. Just let's get through this one piece. So just breaking it down into smaller components for them. And again, this is ninth graders, 15, 16-year-olds. Some of them had even been held back a couple years. They really didn't have that grit. So I had to really teach them what I was doing and show them that I also did it. I do a lot of educational consulting. I have a real estate on the side. I do quite a few different objects myself. So I always bring my experiences into the classroom, and I'm very transparent with them. So them seeing that I'm going through the same situation. I came from a similar environment where parents were first generation, I'm first generation born in America. They didn't get to have their education because they left Cuba right in the 60s when the whole nightmare started. So they saw that I was exactly as them. They came from these environments where they didn't have anyone at home. So they really grew attached to me to be able to say, well, how do I do this? How can I go through that? And I told them, it's just one piece at a time. Let's not look at the whole picture. Let's just take one assignment at a time, one piece. If we're going to do our menu for, you want to do a restaurant idea, let's go with the menu. Menu is an easy way to look at it. If you have a blank sheet of paper and you're not sure where to focus on, then let's go look at samples. Take ideas from there, look at them, get ideas for how would you build it? Is it the same? What could you change? Now you got to look at colors, you got to look at designs. Then we go into a design thinking and show them process of, one of the projects I'd love to do with them in the design thinking is called the gift giving project, where they have to sit there and interview a person over and over again to gain empathy on that person. So taking them through that process, because of course they've been in a classroom where they're always constantly battling each other. Now they're able to look back and say, okay, we really are a knit-fit group here and we can help each other. So little by little, it's really just, taking one bite at a time from the elephant.
Sir, your question is very perceptive because I'll tell you something very interesting, seemingly paradoxical, but when you think about it, it will make sense. Our programs do pre- and post-assessments around domains of the entrepreneurial mindset: communication, collaboration, problem-solving, critical thinking. We also measure the degree to which a student wants to be an entrepreneur at the beginning of a NIFTY program and at the end of a NIFTY program. Our findings, our research consistently shows that after taking entrepreneurship education, fewer young people want to start a business than they did at the outset of the program. And so then you will understand why that finding makes sense, because it's hard. And so again, going back to our broad theme of this panel about how to use entrepreneurship education to help young people discover who they really are and what their passions really are, sometimes the value of what we do is helping students learn what they don't like or that being a business owner is not for them. So it works both ways.
That in itself is value for whatever they end up doing for that employer in the future. I mean, the buzzword is entrepreneur. How can they create value within a company, not necessarily being their own entrepreneur, but if they have that skill set entering their future employer or employment, all the more better that we've done an excellent job in preparing them too.
And that's part of what I have in the classroom, because I'll get the kids, and I teach in 6 through 12. So I start with them often 11-year-olds and up to the 18s. And they'll look at me and say, I don't want to do this. I'm not opening up my own business. And I said, well, what about all the skills you're going to get with it? You don't want to speak in front of an audience. Well, you're going to have to practice how to speak in front of an audience, because eventually you're going to be in some type of business where you're going to have some type of meeting and you're going to have to speak. So again, breaking it down into smaller bits and pieces, we would have smaller presentations of 30 seconds of just introduce yourself at the beginning of the school year, then introduce your pitch, introduce your financials, and before you know it, the kid who wouldn't talk for 30 seconds now will go on for 5 or 10 minutes by the end of the school year. So if nothing else, I always tell them is like your entrepreneurial mindset, which are skills you're going to learn, are the new soft skills for the business world.
And I appreciate the fact that you brought up the research too, since Florida is very interested in the longitudinal data of the students that have engaged in entrepreneurship here, and us tracking them to see how reliably not only do they persist and succeed and complete, but we're more interested too in working with partners external to the agency in economic mobility for residents. And so back to the equity conversation, and really this whole conference is about talking about closing achievement and access gaps in equity. I'm very curious about how entrepreneurship education can be a mechanism for accelerating social and economic mobility for historically marginalized populations, specific zip codes that we know in Florida that have faced historic barriers. Over 800,000 kids in Florida are living in poverty, right? 800,000 kids living in poverty. We know where they are, and we know the education attainment of their parents. About 30% of the household heads of those 800,000 don't have a high school diploma, and even more, perhaps 80% on average, don't have any kind of post-secondary attainment. And so if you look at the data and the reports out there from Kauffman Foundation and others, home equity is a driver of economic mobility for these residents in these zip codes, but next to home equity, business equity. And if you can get business equity up, and if you could start to cultivate pockets of entrepreneurial sort of activity, I wonder, and it's a hypothesis, whether or not we can do better by way of accelerating people out of intergenerational poverty and immobility by doing a better job, I think, of formal entrepreneurship education and training in specific zip codes, in specific schools that target specific populations. It's just a fascinating proposition that Florida is doubling down on, thanks to our governor and our commissioner, who care passionately about closing these achievement gaps and doing everything possible to figure it out.
We're down to our last couple of minutes, so Andy, I'm going to go back to you. Employers often critique educators for not being in tune with what industry needs, but here is an example of a company that is working with education systems to forge a more positive future. With that said, what's one piece of advice you would like to give our other two panelists here about entrepreneurship education and going forward?
Chancellor Mack and Carmen know what they're doing. I'll give a word of advice or a comment to everybody that I want everyone to think about. As you're in this conference, ask yourself, whose tomorrow will you impact today? Think about what you would tell your 13, 12, 11-year-old self, knowing what you know now. And think about what you'll say. And if you think about that, it's pretty simple. It boils down to a lot of easy things. And if you have that mindset, and if we all do that, we're going to create a wave of impact in our kids' lives. So that's one thing I will want to leave with.
Well, ending on a positive note is never a bad thing. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention, and thank you again.